And we turn our attention to Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, who wants all foreign prisoners to serve their sentences abroad and to scrap the Labour government early release scheme. Now, following this statement, the Reform Home Affairs spokesman, Zia Yusuf, launched an attack on the previous government on social media, including some very personal language about the former Conservative Defence Minister, Ben Wallace. He said on X that his policies imported thousands of Afghans to the UK. He said he was a traitor to Britain for this and called him a moron. We did invite Reform UK and Zia Yusuf on the programme today, but no one was available. Lord Wallace, the former Conservative Defence Secretary, joins us now. Ben Wallace, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
How do you respond to those very strong words from Zia Yusuf?
Well, I think it's just rather sad and maybe desperate. Politics comes with an amount of toing and froing and bric-brac, but the use of the word traitor is a very loaded word. Traditionally, treason and traitor comes with a death sentence historically. And, only a few weeks ago, Anne Widdecombe was murdered in what potentially could be a political attack, and that's under investigation, obviously. And, Reform were telling everyone about being careful with their language, and I totally agree with that. But when you start calling people traitors, it is a very heavy connotation, and it's pretty insulting, especially for me. I served my country most of my life. I was in the army for nearly 9 years. I served in Parliament. I've stood for election, put myself in front of the electorate, and none of us in government that I've come across have done anything deliberately to try and harm the country. I think people might think the country's worse off or better off depending on who's in power, but fundamentally, to respond to a set of questions I set out to this reform policy by calling me a traitor is, his language, he should apologise for his language, and I think he should realise that, it doesn't help political discourse or reform in that way.
It is a remarkable use of language, especially given the conversations we've had of late with how we inflame political conversation, but also the impact that could have. We've seen horrific murders of politicians. Obviously, we're in the wake of the murder of Anne Widdecombe. We've seen Joe Cox. We've seen David Amess. We have seen the implications of heightened language like this. And of course, we've seen Nigel Farage talk about Anne Widdecombe and talk about her murder. And to have someone from his party then come out with language like this, I wonder, Ben, do you think they even believe that or buy into it? Or is this merely something as basic as grabbing headlines and attention to try and keep them in the news cycle?
Well, I think this is about this particular individual. I noticed you don't really see Robert Jenrick or Richard Tice use that language much at all. And I think even Nigel Farage, and I have quite a lot of sympathy for Nigel Farage and what he's gone through from political attacks on him insofar as threats and his own security. I've spent my life, I live with a Russian arrest warrant for terrorism issued to me beginning of this year. I've constantly, in my time in politics and indeed previously on operations as a soldier, had threats or attacks against me. So I'm sort of used to it. But I think this particular individual goes around calling people traitors very aggressively. I think he demeans and actually trashes any policy he's trying to talk about. I mean, he responded to my simple question, because I've been around this boy, a number of us have in many parties, trying to empty our prisons of our foreign offenders. There's about 10,000. The top numbers of foreign offenders are usually Irish, Polish, Baltic state, Albanian, Romanian. Those are usually the top. That's the vast majority of them. And if he's going to say we want to empty our prisons, fine. But let's be honest with the public. And these things are easier said than done. And, if Romania says, no, we're not taking them, you either have to let them out early or you have to find a third country. And that will take time. And I think what I'd asked him, as I do with Farage's statement last year about how in 5 days, after being elected, everyone was going to be deported. That's just misleading the electorate, that in the end, these things will take time. Yes, you can do some things. You can probably do more than maybe the other governments do. But it is going to take a lot of time to do. And in the end, you can't just, announce these policies. And when anyone asks them pretty straightforward questions, attack them with calling them people like traitors. I mean, also, if you're going to call someone a traitor, you have to actually put it to someone who really is a traitor. Now, Nathan Gill, the Reform leader of Wales, is currently sitting in jail for 10 years, convicted of taking money from the Russian state to spread disinformation and propaganda. So, that would be classified in most people's book as traitor. Maybe he should direct those insults towards his own former Welsh leader.
Well, Ben, I don't think anyone is condoning the language used there. And I think by and large, most political parties do agree that actually we need to be really mindful of the language we use and how we're talking to one another. But I want to just take a look at the issue for a moment, because we've been talking this morning on the programme about the issues with overcrowding in prisons and what the Prime Minister is going to do and why we've been going around the houses so much about this. But we have to take kind of a step back and a zoom out picture of this, because whilst you may be critical of reform and the things that they're currently saying, there is a fundamental point here, which is that the prison crisis started on your watch when the Conservatives were in government. You lengthened sentences, prisons weren't built, and this catastrophic breaking point that we're now at with our prisons, it didn't come out of nowhere. We could see it coming down the line, and I suppose the question is, why wasn't something done in the 14 years that the Conservative Party was in power?
Well, I think, as you say, you've got to be careful with your language, but also your facts. I was long enough in politics when I was in opposition when the Labour government under Jack Straw had to have an early release scheme. So it didn't just start with the Conservative Party. Prison populations have been growing.
Sure, but it was ongoing.
And spaces have space. Yeah, but you just said it started on your watch, and that's inaccurate. It started way before that. The reality is we did start a prison building scheme, but as we all know in British government, and it is something to be addressed by any government, and we should do, is why does it take so long to build things, whether they're public sector or private sector? Why is our planning laws so difficult? We had made plans to increase prison spaces, if you remember, and in the early days of 2010, David Cameron's government put a lot of time and effort into reoffending, trying to cut reoffending, because that's another way you can fill up prisons. But we always had this block of about 10,000 foreign prisoners sitting in our jails, some of which were very hard to move. Even when there was an EU directive to allow it to be moved, some of these countries wouldn't take it. Ireland is a very specific category, because under the 1921 treaty, I think, when Home Rule and partition and all that happened back in the day, what happened is that's a different treaty, and that makes things even harder to deal with. So the reality is, I think, yes, everyone is trying to do something about it. Reform should level with the public and say, yes, we are going to take stronger steps if that's what they're going to do, but it won't happen instantly. It might take 3 or 4 years. And instead of doing that, they're doing what maybe the other mainstream parties have made the mistakes of the past, which is boiling these things down to slogans, smash the gangs, stop the boats. All very easy to say, but very hard to deliver. And I think that's something that's really important, to level with the public, manage expectations, and explain why things are not as straightforward. Doesn't mean to say you can't do it.
Ben, I take your point about it not being started under your watch. Things they have a longer tailgate. I appreciate that, but the point being about lengthening sentences, and you've addressed that, and I appreciate your time and your insights on the programme this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Ben Wallace there, former Conservative Defence Secretary.